In the heart of the galaxy, where countless stars shone in the endless void, the Empire of Voria reigned supreme. This was a place where power was everything, and in the royal courts of Voria, the princesses and princes were the brightest stars of all. Among them there was one name that everyone whispered in awe: Elora, the vampire princess. Elora was known across the galaxy for her incredible beauty and her unmatched power. She was not like other princesses. She was older than most of the galaxy's rulers, having lived for centuries. Her eyes glowed with an eerie, hypnotic light, and her hair was the color of midnight, flowing down her back in waves. She had been born into an ancient lineage of vampires, a bloodline that had existed since the beginning of time itself. But it was not just her looks that made Elora special. Her power was what truly set her apart. Elora could control the shadows and manipulate the minds of those around her. She could read thoughts, bend wills, and make enemies fall to their knees with a mere gesture. Her strength was beyond human understanding, and she had the ability to heal from wounds that would kill any ordinary being. Elora had lived through wars, betrayals, and countless empires falling apart, but she remained a force to be reckoned with. No one dared to challenge her. However, despite her power, Elora had always been alone. She had spent most of her long life in solitude, hiding in the shadows of history, waiting for the right moment to emerge. She had seen the corruption and greed that filled the galaxy, and she had no intention of getting involved in the petty politics that others were so eager to play. Elora was above it all, or so she thought. The galaxy's most powerful alien princes, however, saw her as the prize they all sought. These princes ruled over vast planets and fleets, each one more powerful than the last. But when it came to Elora, none of their wealth or armies mattered. They all wanted her for one reason: to possess her and make her their queen. They believed that by winning her favor, they could control not only the vampire princess, but also the galaxy itself.
It started slowly, with messages and gifts arriving from distant stars.
At first, it was subtle: flowers from one prince, rare jewels from another. But soon, the gifts became more extravagant: rare artifacts, ships with unimaginable speeds, and vast treasures appeared at her doorstep, all with one goal: to win her heart. The alien princes knew that Elora was not like other women, and they believed that if they could offer her enough, she would choose one of them. But they underestimated her. Elora never once acknowledged any of their gestures. She could feel their eyes upon her, could sense their longing, but she remained aloof. The princess was not interested in their riches or their kingdoms. She had no need for them. She had lived through too many years to be swayed by empty promises of power and luxury. What she wanted was freedom, and no prince could offer that. But the princes did not give up. As Elora ignored their offerings, they began to send more. Each prince tried to outdo the others, sending fleets of ships, sending their armies to her doorstep, hoping to win her favor. They thought they could buy her loyalty, but Elora remained unmoved. She refused to be anyone's possession. She often retreated to the quiet chambers of her palace, away from the bright lights and whispers of the courts. She would walk alone in the dark, her long, flowing cloak trailing behind her like a shadow. The only sounds were the whispers of the wind and the distant hum of the stars. It was in these quiet moments that Elora could finally think clearly, away from the noise of the galaxy's politics. But even in her solitude, Elora knew that her peace was fragile. The princes would not stop. They had already begun to treat her as a prize to be won. She could feel the tension growing, as if the entire galaxy was holding its breath, waiting for her to choose a prince. But what if she chose no one? What if she decided to remain alone, free from the chains of political games? The vampire princess knew that such a choice would make enemies. But she had long been used to that. Enemies were nothing new to her. She had made plenty over the years, and she was more than capable of dealing with them. But there was something else stirring within her, a longing, a desire for something more than just survival. She was tired of being alone. She was tired of watching the galaxy burn with war and corruption while she stayed hidden in the shadows. But even in her loneliness, Elara could not bring herself to trust anyone. The princes, despite their power and their offers, were all the same. They were ambitious, driven by their desire for control. They sought her not because they cared for her, but because they wanted to use her to strengthen their hold over the galaxy. One day, as Elara wandered the halls of her palace, something changed. A message arrived, not from a prince, but from a stranger. It was a message unlike any other. It was simple, yet it caught her attention. The message contained no gifts, no grand promises of power, no political manipulations. It was just a simple invitation. Come to the arena and see what a real fight for freedom looks like. The message was from Varric, a human, a name that was unfamiliar to her. She had heard whispers of his deeds, of his mysterious actions in the galaxy. Varric was a man of mystery, a rogue who had earned a reputation for being impossible to pin down. He had fought against the empires that had oppressed the galaxy's people, and he had won battles against impossible odds. Unlike the princes, Varric was not interested in power or riches. He fought for a cause, for something greater than himself. Elara was intrigued. For the first time in centuries, she felt a flicker of something other than indifference. Could this human be the one to finally awaken something inside her? Could he be different from the princes who only sought to possess her? She could feel a strange pull toward him, but she did not know if it was trust or something else entirely.
And so, Elara made a decision. She would go to the arena.
She would meet Varric and see for herself if this mysterious human was worthy of her attention. She would see if he had the strength, the will, to stand beside her and fight for freedom, just as she had always dreamed. As she made her way toward the arena, Elara couldn't help but wonder what awaited her. Could it be that her long years of solitude were finally coming to an end? Could this human be the one to challenge her in a way the alien princes never had? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. Elara was no longer content to stay in the shadows. The time for waiting was over. The galaxy would soon see what the vampire princess was truly capable of. The arena was vast, filled with the buzz of excitement and anticipation. It was unlike any place Elara had ever seen before. The stands were packed with beings from all across the galaxy. Alayans, humans, and other races that Elara had only heard of in whispered conversations. The air crackled with energy, and the smell of blood, sweat, and the promise of a fight hung in the air. This wasn't just a place for entertainment. It was a battleground, where warriors fought for more than just glory. They fought for their lives.
Elara walked into the arena, her long cloak flowing behind her like a dark cloud.
Her pale skin and glowing eyes caught the attention of many, but she moved with such confidence that no one dared approach her. She was a force in herself, untouchable and beyond reach. Yet today, there was something different in the air. The energy in the arena felt heavier, like the calm before a storm. And in the center of it all was the man who had invited her, Varric. Elara had been curious about him since she received his message. Unlike the alien princes who showered her with gifts and promises of power, Varric's invitation had been simple, almost mysterious. It had not promised riches or kingdoms, but something far more intriguing. Freedom. The idea that someone, especially a human, would dare challenge the galaxy's great powers for the sake of freedom was something Elara could not ignore. She had spent centuries seeking freedom for her people and for herself, but the galaxy had never given her the chance to truly break free. As Elara made her way through the crowd, she saw Varric standing near the center of the arena. His dark hair was tied back, and he wore simple, practical clothing that did not hint at any kind of royalty or grandeur. His presence was quiet but powerful, a stark contrast to the flashy displays of the princes who had come before him. He did not seek attention, but somehow it seemed impossible not to notice him. There was a calm in his eyes, a determination that Elara had not seen in many others. Varric had fought in countless battles across the galaxy. He was known for his sharp mind, his ability to outthink his enemies, and his skill with a weapon. But what truly set him apart was his unwavering commitment to justice. He was not a man seeking fame or fortune. He was a man seeking a cause. He fought for those who could not fight for themselves, for the oppressed, the forgotten, the ones cast aside by the galaxy's rulers. He had been a thorn in the side of many powerful empires, and his name had spread across the stars. Elara had heard rumors of his deeds, but she had never met him in person. She had expected him to be like the other humans she had encountered, small, weak, easily manipulated. But as she looked at him now, she saw something different. There was a fire in him, something that stirred within her own heart. It was not the same kind of fire that burned in the princes who sought her hand. This was a fire of conviction, of purpose.
Varric did not smile when he saw Elara approach.
He merely nodded in acknowledgement, his eyes never leaving hers. There was no arrogance in his demeanor, no attempt to impress her with his power or status. He did not try to win her favor. Instead, he stood there, calm and composed, waiting for her to make the first move. This was not a man who would bend to anyone's will. This was a man who would stand by his own. Elara stopped a few paces away from him, her gaze steady as she looked him over. For a moment, there was silence between them, and the noise of the arena seemed to fade into the background. All she could hear was her own heartbeat and the soft rustle of her cloak. "You are not like them," Elara said, her voice low but clear. She wasn't sure if she was speaking to Varric or to herself. The princes had tried to woo her with promises of wealth, armies, and power, but none of them had ever made her feel like this. Varric did not try to impress her. He did not need to. Varric raised an eyebrow, his lips curling slightly into what could almost be considered a smile. "And you're not like them either," he replied. "You could have chosen any one of them, but you didn't. You chose to come here, to see if I could offer you something more than just another political alliance." Elara tilted her head slightly, intrigued. "And what exactly is it that you offer?" she asked. She had spent so many years hiding her true intentions from those around her, playing the part of the cold, indifferent princess, but something about Varric's presence made her feel like she could drop the mask, even if just for a moment. Varric's gaze softened, and for the first time since they met, Elara saw a glimmer of something human in him, something that was neither power nor pride. "I offer you freedom," he said simply. "Freedom from the Empire's chains, freedom from the expectations of others. I offer you a chance to fight for something that's worth fighting for, something that can change the galaxy, not just for you, but for everyone." The words hit her like a sudden surge of energy. She had spent so much time watching empires rise and fall, knowing that the fight for true freedom was an uphill battle. But Varric's words felt different. They were not just promises, they were a call to action.
"Freedom," Elara repeated, almost as if testing the word on her lips. For centuries, she had longed for it.
But every time she thought she could reach it, something had always held her back. The weight of her past, the chains of her lineage, the constant struggle for survival. It had all kept her from ever truly being free. And yet, standing here before Varric, she felt a flicker of hope. Could it be that he was offering her a path out of the shadows? Before Elara could respond, a loud noise erupted from the crowd. The fight had begun. Varric stepped forward, and Elara followed him. The two of them moved to the edge of the arena, where a large open space had been cleared for the battle. In the center, a group of fighters were already engaged in a brutal contest. Elara watched closely, her eyes scanning the combatants. This was no ordinary fight. These were warriors who had fought in wars across the galaxy, each one skilled in a different form of combat. The stakes were high, and the tension in the air was palpable. Varric turned to her as the fight raged on. "This is where you'll see the truth," he said, his voice steady.
This is where you'll see who's truly willing to fight for what they believe in." Alara nodded, her gaze never leaving the battlefield. She could sense the energy of the fight, the raw intensity of the warriors. But what truly caught her attention was Varric. He didn't look at the battle with the same hunger as the other fighters. He wasn't in it for the glory or the prize. He was there for a purpose. And that purpose was what made him different. As the fight continued, Elara found herself drawn into the energy of the moment. She watched the warriors clash, their weapons flashing in the light of the arena. And with each strike, with each fall, she felt something stir within her. She wasn't just watching a fight. She was feeling the weight of the galaxy's struggles. She was beginning to understand what Varric had meant by freedom. For the first time in centuries, Elara felt alive. She was no longer just a princess watching from the sidelines. She was part of something greater. She was beginning to see the path ahead, and it was more uncertain than any she had ever known. But it was hers to choose. When the fight ended, and the last warrior had fallen, the crowd erupted in applause. Varric turned to Elara, his expression serious but filled with something deeper. Something she hadn't seen in anyone else. "This is just the beginning," he said softly. "There's much more to come." Elara stood still for a moment, taking in the weight of his words. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she was willing to find out. The tension in the galaxy was thick, like the quiet before a storm. Elara had chosen to follow her own path, a path that led her away from the power-hungry princes and into the unknown. She had made the decision to stand beside Varric, a human whose ideals matched her own, whose desire for freedom was as deep as hers. Together they had begun to plan their next move, knowing that the galaxy's rulers would not let them be. They were too dangerous, too unpredictable. The elite would not allow them to challenge the status quo without consequences. But Elara had no intention of backing down. She had lived too long in the shadows, too long watching as those in power crushed anyone who dared to resist. She had seen countless worlds burn under the rule of tyrants, and she would not let the same fate befall others. Varric had opened her eyes to the possibility of change, and she would fight for that change with everything she had. It was not long before their enemies took notice. The alien princes, whose hearts were set on winning Elara's favor, had not forgotten about her. The fact that she had refused every one of their advances had been a blow to their egos. But they had no intention of letting her go so easily. They were determined to break her will, to force her into submission. They believed that she could be controlled, just like every other ruler they had faced. And so, they began to move against her. The first attack came when Elar and Varric were deep in their planning. They had been gathering allies, rebels, dissidents, and those who had suffered under the rule of the empires. Elara had always known that she couldn't do it alone. The galaxy was vast, and the forces against them were too powerful. But together, with the right allies, they could make a difference. But their enemies were prepared. The princes had already anticipated this move. They had spies everywhere, watching every step Elara took. They knew that she was a threat, and they were determined to eliminate it before it could grow. Elara had just received word that a small fleet of ships, under the command of one of the princes, was moving toward their hidden base. She knew they didn't have much time. The base was vulnerable, its location known only to a few trusted allies. It was only a matter of time before they were discovered. Varric was already preparing to take action, organizing their forces and making plans to defend the base. Elara, however, was not content to wait. She knew that if they allowed the princes to strike first, they would lose any chance of winning. The only way to stop them was to take the fight to them. She approached Varric with her decision. "We cannot wait," she said. "If we let them come to us, we'll be at a disadvantage. We need to strike first, disrupt their plans before they can gather their full force." Varric looked at her, his expression serious.
"I agree, but we have to be careful."
"The princes are not like the others we've faced. They have armies, fleets, resources beyond our imagination. I know, Elara said, her voice firm. But we cannot let fear control us. We cannot hide in the shadows any longer. If we want to change the galaxy, we have to take risks. Varek hesitated, then nodded. I trust you, Elara. We'll do it your way. And so they made their move. With Varek at her side, Elara led their forces in a bold strike against the prince's fleet. The battle was fierce, and the odds were stacked against them. But Elara fought with the strength and determination that had kept her alive. For centuries, she could feel the power of the shadows flowing through her. Her mind, sharp and focused. Every strike, every move, was calculated. And with Varek's leadership, their forces held their own. For a moment it seemed like victory was within reach. The prince's fleet was faltering, their ships damaged, their forces retreating. But then, something unexpected happened. As Elara and Varek prepared to finish the battle, the skies above them darkened, and a new fleet appeared on the horizon. It was not the prince's fleet. They had already been defeated. This new fleet was much larger, its ships far more advanced. Elara's heart sank as she recognized the insignia on the ships. It was not just the princes who were after her. The Empire, the very forces that had oppressed the galaxy for centuries, had sent reinforcements. They had come to crush her rebellion once and for all. Elara's mind raced as she tried to think of a plan. There was no way they could win this fight now. They were outnumbered, and their forces were already stretched thin. The Empire's ships were massive, their firepower overwhelming. They had no choice but to retreat. "Fall back!" Elara shouted to her forces. "Get to the hidden base!" Now? Varek hesitated, looking at her with concern.
Elara, we can't leave now. We've come too far.
"We have no choice," Elara replied. "If we stay, we'll all be destroyed. We need to live to fight another day." Reluctantly, Varek gave the order to retreat. The rebels scrambled to their ships, fleeing the battle as the Empire's fleet bore down on them. Elara watched as their forces scattered, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision. She knew that retreating now meant giving up their base, giving up everything they had worked for. But it was the only choice they had. As they made their way back to the hidden base, Elara's mind was already working on their next move. She knew this was not the end. They had taken a blow, but they had not been defeated. She would not allow it. She had lived too long, fought too hard, to give up now. But what Elara did not know was that their retreat had already been anticipated. The princes, whose pride had been wounded by her rejection, had been biding their time. They had made their move when Elara least expected it, and now they were prepared to take advantage of her retreat. The betrayal came when they returned to the base. Elara and Varek arrived to find the base in ruins. Smoke rose from the shattered remains of their ships, and the once hidden base was now exposed, its defenses obliterated. There was no sign of their allies, no sign of anyone who had been there. It was as if the entire base had been wiped off the map. Elara felt a cold rage wash over her as she stood amid the wreckage. She had known that the princes would not give up, but this was a betrayal of the highest order. They had used her, played her like a pawn in their game, and now they had taken everything from her. Varek stood beside her, his expression grim.
It was a trap. They knew we would retreat here.
Elara's fists clenched at her sides. "They've underestimated us," she said, her voice cold. "We will not let this go." But even as she spoke, Elara knew that the stakes had changed. This was no longer just a fight for freedom. This was a fight for survival, and she would stop at nothing to ensure that her enemies paid the price for their betrayal. The devastation of their hidden base hung heavy over Elara and Varek, the once safe haven where they had gathered their forces and made their plans, was now nothing more than a smoldering ruin. The Empire had struck with a force Elara had not anticipated, and their allies were scattered,
their fate uncertain. She stood in the wreckage, her heart heavy, her mind racing. How could they have known? How had the Empire outsmarted them at every turn? Varric stood beside her, his face grim, eyes scanning the horizon as though searching for any sign of hope. But Ilara knew there was no hope here. Not anymore. Where are they? Ilara muttered, more to herself than to Varric. Where are our allies? Varric's voice was soft, but there was a steel-like determination behind it. We'll find them. But right now, we have to survive. The Empire won't stop until they've destroyed everything we've built. Ilara turned to face him. His words cut through the fog of her thoughts, grounding her in the harsh reality of the situation. They couldn't afford to be weak. They had to think beyond the destruction of their base. They had to plan their next move carefully. We can't let them win, Ilara said, her voice low but filled with conviction. They think they've broken us. But they haven't, Varric nodded, his eyes reflecting a flicker of hope. Then we fight back. But we need to strike where it hurts. We need to hit them where they least expect it. The plan was set into motion immediately. Ilara and Varric gathered the remaining forces that had managed to escape the assault. The rebellion had suffered a major blow, but they were not defeated. Not yet. They were survivors, and they would continue to fight. But this time, their battle would not be one of open conflict. It would be a battle of strategy, of intelligence, and of striking in the shadows. They knew they could not take on the full force of the Empire. The odds were too great, and their enemies were too powerful. But Ilara had spent centuries studying the art of warfare, and she knew that the key to victory often lay in the smallest details, in the moments that others overlooked. The princes, the Empire, they were all too focused on power, too focused on overwhelming force. Ilara would use that against them. She and Varric spent the next several days in the shadows, working in secret, gathering intelligence from every source they could find. They sent small groups of rebels to infiltrate the Empire's ranks, to gather information and disrupt their operations from within. Every piece of knowledge they uncovered was a step toward victory, a step toward reclaiming what they had lost. But there was still the matter of the princes. Ilara knew that they were not finished with her. They had been humiliated by her refusal to choose any of them, and now they would stop at nothing to force her into submission. They had underestimated her once, but they would not make that mistake again. The princes had one thing that Ilara did not: resources. They had armies, fleets, and wealth at their disposal. But Ilara had something far more dangerous: her mind, and she would use it to turn the tide in their favor. For the next few weeks, Ilara and Varric worked tirelessly. They put their plan into motion, slowly but surely turning the tables on the princes and the Empire. They used their knowledge of the Empire's weaknesses to strike at their supply lines, disrupt their communications, and sow chaos in their ranks.
Each victory, no matter how small, was a victory nonetheless.
The princes were beginning to feel the pressure. The Empire's grip on the galaxy was starting to loosen. But then, just when things seemed to be going in their favor, the unexpected happened. Ilara and Varric received word that one of the princes, Kadrin, the most powerful of them all, had decided to take matters into his own hands. He was no longer content to sit in the shadows waiting for Ilara to choose him. He had decided to come for her, personally. Kadrin was not like the other princes. He was ruthless, known for his cunning and his ability to manipulate those around him. He was a master of politics, a manipulator of minds. And Ilara knew that he was dangerous. If he was coming for her, it meant one thing: he was ready to end the rebellion once and for all. Varric could see the concern in Ilara's eyes as she read the message.
"We knew this was coming," he said, his voice steady. "But we can't let him control us. Ooh, we have to make a stand." Ilara's thoughts raced.
She knew Varric was right. This was their moment. The Empire was closing in, and the princes were growing desperate.
If they did not act now, all would be lost. But to confront Kadrin would be risky. He was a master strategist, and he would not fall easily. Alara knew this would be their hardest fight yet, but the time for hesitation was over. The rebellion had already lost so much, and they could not afford to lose any more. Alara had spent too many years watching others fight for power, for control. She had watched as the princes and the empire crushed those who dared to resist. But she would not be one of them. She would not stand by and watch as the galaxy's rulers continued their reign of terror. She would fight, and she would win. "Prepare the forces," Alara said, her voice filled with determination. "We strike now, while Kadrin is still moving. We will face him head-on. This is the final choice." Varek looked at her, a mixture of admiration and concern in his eyes. "Are you sure? Alara had never been one to shy away from danger, and he knew she would not back down now. "I'm sure," Alara said, her gaze unwavering. "This is the only way." The rebels mobilized quickly. They knew what was at stake, and they were ready to fight. The battle would take place on a planet deep within the Empire's territory, a place where the princes had made their stronghold. The stakes could not have been higher. Alara and Varek led the charge, their forces moving swiftly and decisively. The air was thick with the energy of the battle, as explosions echoed in the distance. The princes' forces were formidable, but they had underestimated the rebels. Alara and Varek had planned for this moment. They had prepared, and now it was time to execute their strategy. The battlefield was chaotic, but Alara remained calm, her mind sharp as ever. She could feel the shadows around her, could sense the movements of her enemies before they made a move. It was a skill that had served her well for centuries, and now it was more valuable than ever. She moved through the battlefield like a ghost, her strikes quick and precise, her power unstoppable. But then, Kadrin appeared. He was a towering figure, his dark armor reflecting the light of the battle. His eyes burned with rage, and he wielded his weapon with deadly precision. He was everything Alara had expected: ruthless, calculating, and incredibly dangerous. But Alara had faced many enemies in her long life, and she was not afraid. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on Kadrin's. "It's over," she said, her voice cold and determined. Kadrin smirked. "You think you can defeat me?" "You are nothing but a princess hiding in the shadows."
"I am more than that," Alara replied, her voice low but powerful.
"I am the end of your empire." The two of them clashed, their weapons meeting with a deafening roar. The battle was fierce, each blow struck with the weight of centuries of pain and loss. Kadrin was strong, but Alara was faster, her mind always one step ahead. They fought like two forces of nature, neither willing to back down. But in the end, it was Alara who prevailed. With a final, decisive strike, she disarmed Kadrin, sending him crashing to the ground. His eyes were filled with disbelief as he looked up at her, but there was no mercy in Alara's gaze. She had made her choice. This was the end. The battle was won. The rebellion had triumphed, and the Empire's grip on the galaxy was broken. The princes had been defeated, and the galaxy's rulers had been overthrown. Alara stood victorious, but she knew this was only the beginning. The fight for true freedom had just begun. As she looked at Varek, standing beside her, Alara knew that they had made the right choice. Together, they had changed the course of history. And this time, it was humanity's turn to lead the way.